Tonight, you'll check on your sleeping child one more time before you go to bed. You'll listen for their breathing. You'll adjust the blanket. You'll do this without thinking because keeping a child alive feels instinctive, automatic, almost easy. But the real answer is far stranger. For most of human history, keeping a single child alive to adulthood was one of the hardest things a person could do. And you didn't do it alone. Not even close. Picture a mother 200,000 years ago. She's carrying an infant who cannot walk, cannot cling tightly, cannot regulate its own body temperature. Human babies are born earlier and more helpless than almost any other primate. A newborn chimpanzee can grip its mother's fur within hours. A human newborn can barely lift its own head. Why would evolution design a baby this fragile? Because the human brain is too big to finish growing inside the womb. If it did, birth would be impossible. So babies are born early, unfinished, and completely dependent. That single fact changes everything about how ancient humans had to live. A mother alone, carrying an infant like this, foraging for food, watching for predators, and caring for older children, would not survive. The math doesn't work. She cannot do all of it at once, so something else had to happen. Someone else had to help. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy spent decades studying this exact problem, and her answer reshaped how we understand human childhood. She calls it cooperative breeding. In most primate species, mothers raise infants almost entirely on their own. Humans broke that pattern. Grandmothers, older siblings, aunts, and unrelated group members all shared the work of keeping infants alive. Hrdy argues this wasn't a nice bonus. It was the reason the species survived at all. Think about what that means. Your ability to trust strangers, to read a stranger's face and guess whether they're safe, to feel calm when someone besides your parent holds you as a baby, may be a direct evolutionary echo of a time when survival required exactly that. A baby who could bond with multiple caregivers had better odds. A baby who could only tolerate one caregiver was fragile in a much more dangerous way. Here's where it gets stranger. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes noticed something odd while studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer group in Tanzania. Human females live for decades after they stop being able to have children. Almost no other mammal does this. Elephants don't. Chimpanzees don't. Why would evolution keep an older female alive long after her own reproduction has ended? Hawkes found the answer in the hands of grandmothers. She watched older Hadza women spend their days digging up tubers, tough underground roots that young children couldn't dig or chew on their own. These grandmothers weren't retired. They were feeding their grandchildren directly, freeing up the mother to have another child sooner because someone else was covering the last one. Hawkes called this the grandmother hypothesis. Menopause isn't a biological failure. It might be one of the most powerful survival tools our species ever developed. So a child's survival wasn't hanging on one relationship. It was distributed across a small web of people, each one carrying a piece of the burden. Anthropologist Barry Hewlett studied this same pattern among the aka forager communities in Central Africa and found something that surprises most modern parents. Aka infants were held almost constantly by multiple people throughout the day, not just the mother. Fathers among the aka held their infants for hours daily, far more than fathers in most industrialized societies today. Other children held infants too. A baby might pass through a dozen sets of arms before sunset. Why does this matter? Because it means the infant brain evolved expecting company. Not one face, many faces, not one voice, a chorus of them. When you feel soothed by being around trusted people, when isolation feels wrong in your bones, you're feeling something your ancestors' infant brains were built to expect and now rarely get. Now picture the risk side of this world. Infant mortality among hunter-gatherer groups is estimated at somewhere between 20 and 40% in the first year of life alone. Read that again. Nearly half of all infants might not survive their first year in some ancient populations. This wasn't rare tragedy. It was the baseline condition of being human for almost all of our history. Against that backdrop, every extra set of hands mattered enormously. A grandmother digging tubers meant one less week the child went hungry. An older sibling watching an infant meant the mother could gather food 20 minutes longer. A neighbor holding the baby meant the mother's arms could rest, her back could recover, her body could keep producing milk. None of these contributions looked dramatic on their own. Together, they were the difference between a lineage that continued and one that ended. This is also why ancient human groups almost never operated as isolated nuclear families. The idea of one mother, one father, and their children living entirely apart from a wider group would have been a death sentence for most of human history. Children survived because groups survived. Community wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was the entire operating system. There's a psychological fingerprint left behind by all of this. Researchers studying attachment have found that children can form secure, healthy bonds with several trusted caregivers at once, not just a single primary figure. That flexibility isn't a modern accommodation for busy parents. It's the ancestral default. Your brain was built across millions of years for a village, not a solo act. Consider the modern mirror of this. Today, many parents raise children in small, isolated households, often without nearby grandparents, without dependable neighbors, without the built-in support that shaped the human infant brain in the first place. The exhaustion so many new parents describe isn't weakness. It's a mismatch. You're running an ancient system that expects a dozen hands, using only two. You can see traces of the old pattern wherever it survives. A grandmother who insists on visiting every week isn't just being sentimental. She She may be responding to an instinct older than language itself, one that once meant the difference between a grandchild who lived and one who didn't. A friend who steps in to hold your child so you can shower isn't a modern convenience. She's playing a role that anthropologists can trace back tens of thousands of years. Even the way children play with younger siblings carries this fingerprint. In many traditional societies, children as young as 6 or 7 take on real responsibility for toddlers, not as a chore but as an expected part of growing up in a group that survives together or not at all. That impulse in an older child to protect a younger one isn't purely learned, it's ancient scaffolding, still standing. So the next time you watch a stranger smile at your baby on a train, or a neighbor offer to babysit for an hour, notice what's happening underneath the surface. You're not witnessing a modern kindness, you're witnessing the oldest survival strategy our species ever built, still quietly running in the background of ordinary life. Tonight, when you check on your sleeping child one more time before bed, you won't be doing it alone in the way it feels. Somewhere behind that instinct sits a grandmother digging tubers, a father holding an infant for hours, a sibling keeping watch, a whole web of hands that made sure this moment could exist at all.